Please follow your notes, Chapter 15 notes, to complete these with this video. So previously in Chapter 13 we looked at perfect competition, which is the most competitive marketplace where there are many buyers and sellers and no barriers to entry. Chapter 14 we looked at the opposite end of the spectrum, where there was monopoly, only one firm, and there were huge barriers to entry. So the remaining two market structures, the next one is Chapter 15, Monopolistic Competition, which we'll look at right now. So a monopolistic competitive marketplace is a marketplace where there are a large number of firms competing, so there are many firms, and there are also no or little barriers to entry. So in that regard, it's similar to perfect competition. Each firm produces a differentiated product. So before in perfect competition, it was a homogeneous product. Here it's a little different. So it's a product that is slightly different from other products that firms are competing. It has good substitutes, but not perfect substitutes. And firms are free to enter and exit. Let's just jump down to name some industries that are monopolistically competitive. So you could think perhaps the fast food industry. So for example, hamburger, McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's. So they all sell hamburgers, fast food, but they're all produced a little differently, they all taste a little differently. So there are good substitutes. You might like McDonald's more than Burger King, but they're not perfect substitutes because they're different. So the question is, in the long run, would we expect monopolistically competitive firms to be able to earn economic profit? So think about that. Well, you could think about perfect competition. In perfectly competitive firms, since there are no barriers to entry, therefore firms can enter. So anytime there's an above average economic profit, which is greater than zero, we know what can happen is, we know that firms can enter the marketplace and drive out the profits. So in the long run, we would expect no monopolistically competitive firms would earn a normal profit. So if you look at the bottom of the page, here is a summary of the four different industry structures. So as mentioned, we looked at Chapter 13 was perfect competition, and below it are the characteristics of that competitive model. Then we went to Chapter 14, which was monopoly, and now currently we're on Chapter 15, monopolistic. So just to review, there are many firms, no barriers to entry, products are not identical, they'll make their own versions, so once again there are good substitutes but not perfect substitutes. And at the bottom you can see skip the four-firm concentration ratio and the other index. That was really just a way to identify by looking at the top four firms and what percentage of the marketplace that they dominate, and to decide which marketplace they fit best into, but we're going to skip that. You can read that if you would like. So as before, we're going to just review different marketplaces. So perfectly competitive firm, we know there were side-by-side graphs. We had one for the firm and then one for the marketplace. And each firm we said was a price taker. And the firm had a perfectly elastic demand curve, and it was horizontal. So if you recall, the price taker, we had P equal D equals the marginal revenue. and that was a horizontal curve. That was for the firm. For monopoly, we said we didn't have to distinguish between the firm and the market because there's only one firm and the firm is the market. So therefore there were no side-by-side graphs. Well, that's going to be true for monopolistically competitive industries as well. The reason being is even though there are fast food hamburgers, it's hard to put Burger King and McDonald's into the same graph because they're a different product and therefore a different price. So for monopolistically competitive firms, we're actually just going to have an industry. We're just going to have one graph, and it's almost going to be identical to that of the monopolist. So for both the monopolist and the monopolistically competitive firm, both have a downward sloping demand curve, and marginal revenue for both is below the respective demand curve. So as we have done numerous times, if we want an economic profit in the short run, well, we know that price has to be above ATC. Of course, total revenue has to be greater than total cost. So we do the same thing. You can try it on your own right now. We're going to do the same thing as we did with the monopolists. We're going to have a demand curve, which is downward sloping. We have the marginal revenue curve, which is below. If you remember, the x-intercept of the marginal revenue is actually the midpoint of the x-intercept of the demand curve. We have the marginal cost curve, and our maximizing profit rule is to set MR equal to MC. It's hard doing this with my finger, unfortunately. So we can do better. That's a little better. So there is our quantity. We go up to the demand curve, and that gives us our price. So if we want to find economic profit, P has to be above ATC. So the 2 points we put along that Q1, our output quantity, we put a dot, which represents the point on the average total cost curve. One of the point on the ATC curve, we know ATC intersects the marginal cost curve when ATC is minimum, so we go to a point below on the marginal cost curve, and then we draw the average total cost curve, which looks like a parabola. To shade in the profit, so we come across, we have our ATC. Since price is above ATC for all these quantities from 0 up through Q1, this region represents our economic profit. And here is the books graph, obviously much more clear. So the demand curve, downward sloping marginal revenue curve below it, we do on the marginal cost curve. Then the key thing is we find the output level. To maximize profit, we set MR equal to MC. We come down, we find our quantity, then we go up to the demand curve to get our price. There's a profit, price has to be above average total cost. So they put the average total cost way down here, so far below the minimums. That side we come across, there's our ATC. So the blue rectangle is the economic profit. Okay, and this is an aside question. If we want to maximize revenue, and once again, that's not a goal, we usually want to maximize profit, but if we want to maximize revenue, what do? We know if you maximize revenue, what you want to do is you want to get marginal revenue equal to 0. So that is the x-intercept of the marginal revenue curve. And at that x value, if you go up to the demand curve, we know that's the point of unit elasticity. So that was just a review. Okay, so the question is, what happens if there is a loss? Well, this is similar to what we've done each time before in the graph, more precisely like that of a monopoly. If there's a loss, then our price is below our ATC curve. So obviously if some company has a very low demand, people don't buy the profit, or if they have high costs for a lawsuit, then there could be a loss. So in the short run, the loss can exist. As we'll see, will be driven out by firms leaving the industry. But we're going to do the same curves. We're going to put our demand, marginal revenue. We're going to do our marginal cost curve. So we have our price and our quantity, our axes. To find the quantity we produce, we set MR equal to MC. So at this point, but we come down to the x-axis, call that Q1. We go up a little better this time doing it. Come across. So that is my price. Well, if I want an economic loss at this point, at that quantity, I may ATC curve above it. So I'll put my ATC up here. The minimum point of the ATC curve has to intersect MC at a Y value below our other dot. So if we draw a parabola with the vertex at the MC minimum curve, we'll get this. So up here coming across, we have our ATC value extended my line vertically. So therefore this rectangular shape, ATC minus P for all quantities from 0 to Q1 would represent my economic loss. And that's the same thing as we just did, that the book did. So once again, demand, marginal revenue, you set MR equal to MC. To find the quantity, you go up to the demand curve to get your price. So 40 is the price. Put a point above that. They put it at 50 for the ATC. So looking at this, we know the profit is going to be, as the book has below here, $10. That's the difference between 50 and 40. This is the loss. And it's going to be times 40, watch the unit, times 40,000. So therefore the loss will be 400,000. So the question is, if there is a loss in the short run, how we determine if the firm should stay open or close? Well, this is going to be the same thing that we did back for perfect competition in the shutdown rule. Since in the short run we have fixed costs, which you have to pay regardless if you open or close. So the question is, when should you close? When should you stay open? So our pricing rule is, if your price is above your average variable costs, if you can cover your variable cost, then you'll have some extra money you can pay down some of those fixed costs. So this is the rule in the short run that we would stay open. Of course, if you cannot even cover your variable costs, you're getting further behind, you're losing more money, so you would close. And lastly, if price equals average variable cost, you're 50-50, you're indifferent. You could produce 0, produce the full quantity, where MR equals MC, or anything in between. So you think it's kind of a 50-50, do what you want to do. And as I mentioned before, well, if the monopolist and monopolistic competitive firms are the same exact graphs, why do we separate them? Well, as was written here, although there's a difference in the short run, there's no difference in the short run. There's a very, very big difference in the long run. We know monopolistically competitive firms, they have no barriers to entry, unlike monopolists, which has huge barriers to entry. So other firms will enter if there is a profit. So competition will drive away any type of economic profit in the long run. So here's a real-world example. As we know, at one point, cell phones, way back, you guys don't realize that because cell phones always had cameras on them. Not all cell phones had cameras. At some point, a company put a camera on the cell phone. As you can imagine, the demand for that product went way up, and they had very, very, very high economic profit, above average economic profit. Well, since there is no protection for this, other companies could mimic it, and would expect that although demand increased right away for that product, other firms enter the marketplace. They put cameras on their phones, revised the technology, or new firms just came out and did it. And of course, at that point, the profit was driven away, back down to a normal profit. And of course, pricing also declined. So the key difference is for a monopolist, when we studied that chapter, we actually skipped the graph of the normal profit. And the reason why, it would be more of a fluke for a monopolist to have a normal profit. Since they are protected, you would think, assuming they have a good product, that they would have an above average profit. But if the monopolist did have a normal profit, or if monopolistically competitive firms had a normal profit, which once again we would expect would occur in the long run, because firms could enter or leave if there was a loss or above average profit. So the same parts of the graph are true. I'm going to draw, but first we want our P equal to our ATC. So you can draw the downward sloping demand curve. You're going to draw your marginal revenue curve, the marginal cost curve. We're going to set MR equal to MC. So at that point, come down to your x-axis. That is your quantity. Go up to your demand curve. That is your price. So if we went P equal to ATC, well, we have to identify the point. That point, that's where P is, so ATC has to be there. So we want an ATC curve that goes to that point, and it's going to have a minimum point on the marginal cost curve below it. The key thing is that point that I drew here, where P equals ATC, notice the demand curve and the average total cost curve are tangent. And that's always going to be the case, and I'll explain that in class, but I want you to think, why is it that the demand curve and average total cost curve are tangent at that point, and why is it the ATC curve does not go below the demand curve? So think about that, and we will go over that when we have class. But as we do this, of course, the profit that's going to result in the long run is going to be a normal profit, an average profit, or one where the profit, the economic profit, equals zero. So once again, these are all synonymous. And this is what the book did. So you can notice, as I was referencing, that the price is equal to the average total cost curve, and that they are tangent to demand curve and the average total cost curve. And you can see from the graph and what the book had written in this page, the average total cost is zero. And of course, go in the opposite direction. Suppose that there is an economic loss in the short run. What's going to happen in the long run? Well, for monopolistically competitive firms, since there are no barriers to entry, if there is a loss, some firms are going to leave, so supply is going to decrease. That leads to a decrease in the price. And then at that point, that's going to continue until price equals ATC. Okay, so just some review graphs for perfectly competitive firms in the long run. You should be able to do this on your own really quickly. You can always pause the video, but I'm going to run through it very fast. So in the market, we have demand, we have supply, we have the price, we have the output, big Q for the output for the market. Firm is a price taker, horizontal perfectly elastic demand curve, P equals D equals MR, marginal cost curve, set MR equal to MC, little q is a quantity. Well, now here's a pause. If it's a long run, I don't have to tell you what kind of profit is it, because perfectly competitive, you have to know in the long run there is a normal profit, an average profit, an economic profit equal to 0. So if that's the case, you have to realize you want to set P equal to ATC, so the minimum point is right there. You draw your average total cost curve. So this would be a graph, perfectly competitive firm, side by side market and firm with a long run equilibrium, which means there is a normal profit. Make sure you understand that. In the long run for monopolistically competitive firms, well, for the same reasoning as above in the long run, since there are no barriers to entry, there will be a normal profit once again. But since it's a firm for monopolistically competitive, there's just one graph. We do the downward sloping demand curve, downward sloping marginal revenue curve, marginal cost curve. We want a normal profit, so P has to equal ATC. Find your quantity, go up to your demand curve for your price. So if you recall, this is the one where it gets a little tricky. The average total cost curve is tangent to the demand curve. We do have a point below it on the marginal cost curve. That's the minimum. And then we draw that. And that's our normal profit. I'm going to stop the video here. I think it may be too long. I will add part 2, which should finish up the chapter.